the land that I had now owned was like a money pit. I started, trying to get different designs, like how can we get costs lower? And it came down to square footage. So I went from like 2000 to 1800, 1800 to 1500, 1500 to 12 and down to 1000. Then he gave up on me. He's like, I can't do this lower than that.
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and today we delve into the story of a listener turned tiny home owner, Maegan Bell. Maegan is an active duty Army logistics officer who's going to share with us how she exchanged her plans for a traditional house for the compact efficiency of a custom-built tiny home in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. We'll explore the challenges of setting up utilities, the joys of bringing family closer together, and how tiny homes can offer a unique solution for military families on the move. Maegan's journey is filled with insights and practical advice for anyone considering this lifestyle. So if you're curious about the tiny house movement or looking for tips on how to make it work for your family, stay tuned for this fascinating conversation with Maegan Bell. As you'll hear in this conversation, I really love hearing from Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast listeners, especially if you have embarked on the journey to create your own tiny house. So if that sounds like you and you're interested in being featured on a future episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, send me an email to podcast@thetinyhouse.net and introduce yourself. I'd love to feature your story on a future episode. Again, that's podcast@thetinyhouse.net. All right, I am here with Maegan Bell. Maegan is an active duty military officer who sought to have a vacation home where her family could get out of the hustle and bustle of the Washington, D.C. area and reconnect with nature. She bought 4.5 acres of land nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia during the pandemic. Skyrocketed building costs made her initial plan to build a traditional house on the property not feasible. Maegan pivoted from that plan and instead had a custom tiny house built where she and her family now enjoy and make beautiful lifetime memories. Maegan Bell, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. And I love when a listener of the show emails me with their story. I told you this in the pre-interview. Be careful if you email your podcast host, you might get invited on the show.
Yeah. I did not expect that. I just wanted to share how much the show meant to me. But I appreciate the opportunity to share my journey.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that too. And sharing your journey is what the show is all about. So I'm really glad you reached out. And, I was hoping you could, your bio kind of gives the outline, but how did you go from, building a traditional house to a tiny house? Can you talk about that thought process?
Yeah. So I always joke with my husband about like what came first. In tiny house communities, like, is it the tiny house or is it the land? Well, for us, it definitely was the land.
Okay.
And so I found myself spring of 2021 watching these like home improvement, home and garden shows. And I saw this one show of like when they're looking for a house or, searching for something. And this particular couple was looking for land so they could create a vineyard. But just that whole process, I was like, oh my gosh,
Okay.
that would be so cool to have acreage. I was stationed in Central Virginia teaching ROTC, but we were about to have a military move to DC in a few, like later on in that year. So, and we loved our time being in Central Virginia.
Okay.
And so I was like, oh, we could get land. I see land signs all the time in our area. So I looked at a bunch of places and finally found this 4.5 acre property that was on the side of literally a side of a mountain. It was,
Wow.
and it was completely undeveloped.
Wow.
And my husband was like, no, 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 no. We went back a couple times, but it's like 8 minutes from the ski slopes there and near the fingers. And I was like, the location is awesome. And if I could see the potential of having a mountain view and everything. And so my husband ended up seeing some clients in the area where they had did something similar on a larger scale, obviously. And so he finally saw the vision. So he allowed me, we put in an offer, we got the house. We got the land. And I was super excited. And so I was going through the whole, never did this before in my entire life. bought a house one time,
Mm-hmm.
so the house we were living at the time was, so that
Yeah.
I was a very novice home buyer, let alone buying raw land and trying to make it habitable. And so I was walking through with my realtor who was like, oh, you can build a traditional house, construction to perm. And so that was the way I was going to go. And fall of 2021, I was like, let's go with the designs. And when I did those designs, and way at that time, the housing market went insane with everything skyrocketed. And so did the building costs. And so my budget for this vacation home, it's not even our house, end up being more than double what what we had intended. And it's like,
Oh,
I'm not going to
wow.
have a 30-year mortgage for something that's not even my house. And yeah, we were planning on doing Airbnb and
Right.
stuff with that, but it looked like the land that I had now owned was like a money pit.
Mm.
And so I started, trying to get different designs, like how can we get costs lower? And it came down to square footage.
Mm-hmm.
So I went from like 2,000 to 1,800, 1,800 to 1,500, 1,500 to 12, and down to 1,000. Then he gave up on me. He's like, I can't do this lower than that. So then I started searching anything lower than like 1,000 square foot. And I guess the AI of the search and came up with tiny houses. I never knew anything about tiny houses before that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Never. I didn't look for it. It found me. Like I didn't find a tiny house. The tiny house movement found me. And so when I started looking at that,
Nice.
and I was like, well, wait, this is just it's a vacation home. It's a place for our family to connect. I'm still in the Army. And so I go away for long periods of time, or we just a whole retreat, right? Or
Yeah.
to be regenerized as a family as a whole and also personal.
Yeah.
So it was like, okay, this dead hope finally got a spark of like life in it.
Yeah.
And so I went into a deep dive of looking for custom home builders because we couldn't do a DIY. We have two young kids working full time, working in the government
Yeah.
in DC can be very stressful. So we wanted to enjoy it
Yeah.
as soon as
Yeah, I'm
possible.
sure.
So we found a great tiny house builder and went through that journey. And so it was so exciting. So we signed the paper. I think it was like March of 2022, and our tiny house was delivered late April of 2023. So we've had it for a year now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, the house is really gorgeous. It's a movable tiny house. I see that it's on a trailer, but it just looks so spacious. There's a picture of I'm guessing one of your kids kind of doing work on an iPad like at the kitchen table, and the house looks so wide. Is it wider than standard?
It is. So it
Okay.
is 26 feet long and 10 feet wide. And that
Okay.
extra square,
Cool.
we knew it was going to be on the mountain. So we decided to make that investment. And I'm so glad we did. Obviously,
Yeah.
now we have like an RV because we love tiny living and so we've had an RV because we're used to small space and we're going to hit the road.
Nice.
But yeah, so it is wider, and we're actually able, because we have that extra 2 feet in length and width of what's standard. We're also able to do a lot with it, but also include like a washer and dryer, like a regular home side by side washer and dryer. We haven't used
Yeah.
it because we ran out of money and we're off gridding in our tiny house when we stay in it.
Okay.
But when we do, it would be nice.
Yeah, getting power brought to a lot is like shockingly expensive.
Yeah, but for me, see, and this is the area. So I'm a logistics officer by trade. So I've been doing military logistics for over 10 years. And that's why I felt like I wasn't shy away from taking on
Okay.
this venture, because I'm like, I've done this. I've made habitable spaces in austere environments. And so there's a lot of areas where that helped,
Yeah.
but there was also a lot of areas that I did not know anything about. And utilities for undeveloped land was one of them. I didn't even take into account electricity.
Yeah.
We have a generator, a very strong generator that, like I said, we're very comfortable off-gridding there and dry camping there.
Okay.
But I factored in what was funny was getting the sewer set up. So I had called all these people. I even bugged this poor guy that was retired and got like, hey, how do we do? And so I was right on the nail with
Yeah.
the estimation for installing a sewer system. The problem was I didn't take into account that I had my tiny house on the mountain. So what should have been one amount was almost double it. And so that blew our budget that was
Yeah.
already dwindling away. So yeah, and so if I had to, and I was so quick, like I wanted to be in there and enjoy the land. And so I don't think I would do anything different because if we had waited to put in utilities, we wouldn't be able to enjoy it like we have. But if someone was trying to do this like full time,
Yeah.
and you get the land first, like make sure you just put in the utilities or figure out the utilities early on. Don't wait to the back
Yeah.
end because, or if you do, understanding what you're getting yourself into.
So what are you doing in terms of water and electricity? So you mentioned you have the generator for electricity, and then are you like carrying in water, or how are you doing that?
Yeah, so we have water jugs back to my military days. That's the water jugs are a big thing. So
Yeah.
we have like a couple 6-gallon water jugs. We did invest in a shed that's next to the tiny house.
Okay.
So that keeps all our like extra supplies of gardening stuff, the lawnmower, and where we keep the water jugs. I also have a water barrel. I don't collect rain,
Okay.
but it was just another storage of water solution. So we have plenty of water up there. We haven't even touched the water barrel, which we're going to have to use it soon, or I do a filtration system into it. But that's what we use to cook
Okay.
and shower. And in the shower, I got like your typical, there's like
Okay.
Amazon. Amazon is so awesome. You could just think of every crazy thing and someone created it and they have it. So
They have it.
come across, I just write the
Yep.
function of what I need and something pops up. So there's this like a camping shower system where you have it in like a bucket with the water and then you hook it and it's such great. It's USB powered. So we charge it. It has
Wow.
such, yeah. I think I have it in my YouTube channel. I have like the link to it. I did a little small like 3-minute video of how we do it. But so I had this gorgeous shower that I can't use. So I hooked this thing up to the shower head and it's great water pressure. And the whole family, we shower in it. And then we had these like 5-gallon thing of water. So we bring in our water. It's like half of it we boil and the other very old school. And the other half is cold. And it ends up giving the right. My husband has like got this to a T, how much water, cold water, which is boiling water. And it's very comfortable.
Nice.
Funny enough. We wouldn't be able to do that full time. But for us, staying a couple weekends or even one time we stayed there for a full week and we were very comfortable.
That's awesome.
And then for the sewer part, we do have a flush toilet, which we can't use. So I couldn't do anything composting wise. And once again, this would work for us doing short stays, but it would be very costly for someone if they were trying to do this full time. Yeah. But we got these, it's kind of like human kitty litter, right? So there's like, you could do a regular trash bag, but we also get these particular camping bags that go around the inside the toilet. And then we just, it's like the one scoop and it turns human liquid into solids and it's biodegradable. So we can then throw it out with the rest of our trash. And that's how we do it.
Okay. Wow. I love that you kind of didn't let the utilities and all that kind of stop you from enjoying the space. Has that actually become a benefit or something that you look forward to? Like being off grid?
I would love, actually, I've looked into that a lot because we've looked into the grid and the amount for, just like you said, it can be expensive just to set up the grid. And so depending on which of our neighbors, I guess, poles that we can bounce off of, it could be as low as like 3,500. Because here's the thing, and I had it, and so zoning, doing your research. If it was a traditional house, it wouldn't cost that much. If they identified it as a traditional house, you get a certain amount of footage that from the nearest, like, I guess, tower or pole to get your electricity from. And like, we're on a mountain, but it's not that. It's like the perfect blend of being near town, but not being completely like off the beaten path.
Okay.
And so there's other houses at the bottom of our, lower than our houses. But if we had a traditional house, we would have a certain, I think it was like 1,000 like feet
Wow.
Yeah, to like plug into. So it would have been like maybe 1,500 to tap into our nearest neighbor to get it, that they give to you automatically for having a house because it's not considered a traditional house. They charge you by the foot. And so for us, it's like I think if one neighbor's gracious for us to do it when we're ready to do it, it could be anywhere between $7,000 and $10,000 to even just set up electricity on the grid. So I really did look into, because I do love the off grid life. I love the power, that you get from that and controlling and owning. And so I looked into doing solar panels when that day comes. And I'm going back and forth.
Yeah.
If it's just us, I would totally do solar. But because, and even I didn't realize there's like solar like for your wells and the pumping system. I didn't even know about that.
Yep.
So I did a whole deep dive into that. But if it was just us, I would want to do that. But originally we were going to have this like as an Airbnb when we don't use it.
Okay.
I have fell in love with, I was like the one thing you're not supposed to get personally invested in your investments. And I am. And I really don't want to share my place with someone that might not love it like I do. So I've actually put that off. Number one, we don't have utilities, so we can't legally do it. But number two, I don't think I want to share.
Yeah.
So it really comes down to, and my husband's like, he's good either way. So it really comes down to if we decide to make it like an investment years down the road, then maybe we will just have to do the grid.
Yeah.
But if it's just something that we are just enjoying ourselves, or if we just get more comfortable with being off grid, then making the investment with solar.
Yeah.
I think it'll end up being the same amount of money either way. The only difference is after you do the upfront cost, you don't have a bill.
Yeah. So it sounds like, the time that you spend at the tiny house with your family is like very much the opposite. You live in the Washington, D.C. area in a normal size house. How has, spending time at the tiny house affected your family dynamic?
Amazingly. So we have a huge house and everybody, I have my 9-year-old, I have a 3-year-old and a 9-year-old. My 9-year-old is a gamer. And so he just goes into his little room. And so we're all in our own little spaces. And when we get to the tiny house, you can't do that. And so we joke, the only time we actually have family dinner is around when we're at the tiny house. Because we have a cool little table that comes out the way I saw it on Pinterest and I adjusted with my designer, my tiny house building designer, but we love it. And it comes out of like, it's part of the kitchen, I guess, countertop, and it comes underneath it and it comes out. And that's where we have our family dinners. And we just interact more. We joke. Right now we have like the T-Mobile, it's like the home internet, but you can take that thing anywhere. We've taken that on road trips. It's pretty reliable. So
yeah,
my 9-year-old has been able to get, because there's no signal. So we were able to get like 3 bars, sometimes 4. So we get to watch TV, gaming, but sometimes it gets spotty and we can't. And then we have to like talk to each other or do dance parties or do board games or go outside and explore outside, because we do have 4.5 acres, and checking out the wildlife. So it's been really amazing.
Yeah.
The tiny house has provided more than what I had envisioned for the land.
Wow.
And that if we had done a traditional house, we would have just been, if I was even able to afford it and wanted to just go broke and just give in to the crazy cost, it would have been built and we would have just been in this pretty area not interacting.
Yeah.
And it really would have been any different than what we do here. So I'm actually grateful that obstacle went in my way. And so I was able to pivot to something I never would have even explored if it wasn't for the fact that I had to.
Wow. Yeah, that's so cool to hear. I mean, you hear about how tiny houses help to connect people to each other and to their communities, and I just love I love stories like that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that table, and there'll definitely be pictures on the show notes page for the episode, and I encourage listeners to go and check out the photos. It's a really unique design of the house. It's got it's kind of like almost like 3 sections. There's like the entry section has a shed roof, and then the middle section has a gabled roof, and then the back section has a shed roof. Can you talk about the design? And I see a roof deck up there too, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so funny because we actually have once we pay off all the stuff that we have to pay and to save up because we want to do things with cash and not rely on personal loans.
Yeah.
But we have actually enough space to add a second tiny house to our acreage per the zoning.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because we weren't living in it full
Wow.
time, we didn't have to go through a lot
Okay.
like a special use permit, but they just because of the acreage. And so we actually looked into like, okay, well, when we're ready to get another one.
Yeah.
And it's crazy how expensive in just 18 months prices have gone. So I'm also glad that we got our tiny house when we did.
Yeah.
But so we were able to
Yeah.
get a rooftop deck. It was part of the models. One of the things that I found my design because I really wanted a rooftop deck. I don't know. I think I saw it on one of the tiny house shows and was like really thought that that's a normal thing.
Yeah.
And so I found the builder that I had, which happens they were one state away.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they're no longer in business. They got bought out,
Okay.
which is great for them, but not great for us, right?
Yeah.
But it was one of their models. And so I was able to just get 2 gable roofs. And then how they have it with the rooftop deck is really interesting how they put it into it.
Yeah.
And so you can access that from the master loft. And we have like a little ladder that you can put away and then you can attach it when you need it. And my 3-year-old loves going up there. And it's just beautiful, like, especially in the spring,
Yeah.
like spring, summer, and fall. It's so cool being up there. I do yoga up there. And then that also creates another zone. So having a tiny house is you have to have your different zones. And so that was one of those things in the tiny house that we're able to enjoy.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. It's beautiful. And the landscape is just gorgeous. I mean, the ridge line that you can see from that deck, and I can see in one of the photos just how, green everything is. It's beautiful.
Yeah, we love it. We don't have a bad view, whether you're down at just the lower level, at the ground level, or if you're on the rooftop deck. The wintertime, we did a winter and it was just you all the greenery and flowers are gone, but you had this gorgeous, gorgeous unobstructed views of our mountain. So we appreciate that, especially when one time it snowed. And so that was just a lot of fun to see. It's super beautiful. But then even I can't wait now that the spring's coming and like the flowers, because it's like this lush greenery and you're just in mist. It feels like an enchanted forest that we're part of. So it's super gorgeous. And then that's another great thing with us being at the tiny house. Not only are we able to connect with each other, but we're able to connect with nature. And so that's super cool. We've seen wildlife is we're on a mountain.
Yeah.
You're on a mountain. And so wildlife is we have being as far as we are, we actually have off-grid solar surveillance videos. So it's solar powered, but we have surveillance videos throughout our property.
Okay.
And it gives us alerts and stuff like that. And we've seen video in real time. So we've had the deer are just, they don't care. They don't care that we're here. They're just living their life. But then there's a bobcat that had came through. There was a fox that kept running around and setting off the alarm. And then we've had a couple bear visitors. We haven't seen them in person when we're here. I think the generator scares them off. We know what this season will come up. But we've had the bears have gotten very close, curious about our tiny house.
Wow. So you mentioned that, as a logistics officer, you've had a bit of experience turning remote locations and making them habitable. I'm curious if there are any kind of principles or techniques or just parts of your training that you applied to creating this tiny space. And I feel like we all have something to learn from you. So I'm just curious if you can share any of that.
Oh, I appreciate that. So total novice about developing undeveloped land and total novice about tiny houses. But one thing that the military had prepared me to do, because I've moved people and heavy equipment and planes all around the world and field exercises and having to make like an actual kitchen in the middle of a desert, so I've had that experience. So even though I wasn't like an expert in this particular stuff, I knew the thought process. I knew the functionality. I knew the needs. And I think sometimes people, they get so excited about having this happen. You may not think about the third order effects where that's all I do is like, okay, if we want to go through this approach or this mission or this way of going about it, What are the second order effects? Where are we going to get this? How are we going to resupply that? So the funny thing is when we didn't have utilities and we had to pivot, that was super easy for me. That was easy for me to pivot because that's kind of like was easy stuff to find because that's what I do in the Army.
Yeah.
With my experience though, for developing the land and even landscaping it, because it was when they cut into it, it was just a pile of dirt.
Yeah.
But I was able to find my experience in the military, finding, there's a lot of stuff we can't do. And so we have contractors and finding the right people and looking to see
Yep.
their credentials. And so, because there's a lot of people out there that say they can do it, but, so that's one thing of me knowing what to look for. Okay, hey, what can you do? Can you do this? And having those people come out, and really walk your land and understand what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
I am a big supporter, and because there's a lot of scams and things, horror stories about people with tiny houses.
Yeah, there really are.
And whether it's your builder, whether it's the person, I mean, there have been people that are excavating, oh, you're going to develop my land, and the person just ghosted and disappears.
Yep.
And doesn't finish the project. In fact, that actually kind of happened to me. They got too busy and the things got delayed. And so they weren't able to be available. So it wasn't like it was intentional, but I was able to find somebody else to do it just because that's naturally. But
yeah,
for warning for people that are trying to do that, some things to keep in mind. What I like to do when I was looking for contracting work out to get stuff done for my land, even for my tiny house when finding, I would check credentials.
Yeah.
So there's Better Business Bureau. You go online and they put people stuff. Now, some stuff, you can read where people are like complaining for stuff that really isn't the business's fault. It's just a personality situation, but there's some good stuff there. Reviews on, Google or Yelp. I also think that for websites, especially with tiny houses, now this isn't a standard thing, right? You have to look at it both ways. So you have, if the tiny house builder has a website, that kind of says to me that they've done it enough times that they have invested that part in their business. And also they probably have the insurance and other coverage to cover them and cover you.
Yeah.
But that's only one thing. You can have a website and not touch it. So I also look at their social media. And so if you have a website, but you haven't put anything up on bills that you did, there's something going on there.
Yeah.
And you don't need a website. You could have a very strong social media platform of what you did. And that's good too. And you do the reviews, but you just have to look into that because there's also some things that are not there that you're like, there's a gap. Why is there? There's usually something going on. And like I said, go in person. Like if you're able to go in person, if it's a tiny house build, and if you're not able to do a live video tour. Don't have them send you videos. Like have them walk through it. So those are one little tips I would say about finding the right people for your tiny house, and then also just your subcontractors for developing your land. One thing that I do want to make note, if you are developing land, is don't do everything right away. So it got to a point where I was trying to do every single thing. And the person who was excavating my land, it was the greatest advice that she gave me. She's like, you know what? Just do enough that you need, but you don't have to do everything. It's actually probably better for you to spend a good year knowing your land. And knowing what you want. And so we have this one huge boulder because it was very rocky when they excavated, and they were able to get most of the rocks done. In fact, there's at the bottom of my hill, I have plans to do something with landscaping with all these rocks that they picked up. Right? They're like they're not rocks. They're rocks. Like huge boulders, but you can, a person or two could try to roll them and move them and do something decorative. But there was this huge boulder that we couldn't do. Like it was too expensive to like break away. And so I had all these ideas of what to do with it. And I was trying to make some type of use and functionality. But then I ran out of money, so I couldn't. And then over the past year, my kids started playing on it. Like they would like to climb up it and look outside and hang out. And then I was like, you know what? This would be a really cool like kid play area. And if I can make it. So now this summer, it's one of our projects. We're going to have rock climbing like studs. And a friend of mine, we upcycled her slide. So we're going to turn it into this huge boulder that I didn't know what to do with, that I was going to try to do something just to force a decision, because I took a step and really experienced my land and took my time. I'm finding some better use for it that actually works for our family.
Nice. That's awesome. So, looking back over the process of the build, the house design, or even the land and the landscape, is there anything that you'd change if you could go back and do it again?
There is something I'm trying to remember. Okay, so at our other loft, inside the design phase, I'm very happy with how the land came out.
Yeah.
So I'm very pleased with that. We're going to do some more like landscaping for it. But inside the house, there are two things, small things, but I wish I had like listened. So one thing about a lot of people use epoxy for their countertop, which we did. That's like a marble, right? It looks like marble is gorgeous.
Okay.
Or you can make it any type of design you want.
Okay. Oh, wow. That's epoxy?
Yes, that's epoxy.
On top of like
yeah.
Plywood or
I have no idea. I think so. I'm assuming so. I'm assuming so. So yeah, that's epoxy. And it's gorgeous from
wow.
far. But
okay.
if you're there, epoxy is very susceptible to stains. So there are coffee stains. And I tried baking soda and like it's a little bit, it's not that big of a deal. But so if I had to do that differently, I would either have gotten like butcher block, or if I would have done epoxy, I would have done like a darker color. So if it stained, it wouldn't be so obvious. So that's one thing that really like, I'm like, it's beautiful now, but I have kids and I drink coffee and my husband is not one to like clean up right away. But I'm like, so I'm always, that's one of the reasons why I don't want to share my tiny house, because I know that it's going to get destroyed right now.
Right.
So I think in a couple of years, we'll have to swap that out with something else. And then the other thing is to access our boys' loft.
Okay.
It's like a ladder that's kind of like a drawdown type of thing. And so it's like a winch on the side of the wall.
Okay.
My builder suggested I get like a automatic where you press the button. It's like there's different types. And I was so anti that. I was coming from my military brain where if things break down, you need to manually do it. And so I was all about self-sufficiency. And that was where that hurt me to a T, because it takes like a good like 7 to 8 minutes of a lot of like arm power just to draw that thing down.
Oh, of like turning the
winch to bring it down. Cause I mean, we're like throwing at it and I mean, that thing is durable, but it takes a while. And of course my kids love going up there and playing up there. Cause once again, that's another zone that they can enjoy.
Yeah.
So, I get a lot of workout. So we're going to have to swap that out and do what my builder told me to do in the first place. So if you have a builder who's done this a while and they make a suggestion, err on the side of caution that they might know what they're talking about.
Yeah, it sounds like your builder was great. I'm sorry to hear that they got bought out. Or again, good for them, but bummer for other people.
I know.
Yeah. So, as a military officer, is there the possibility that you'll have to move, far from the tiny house?
Yeah, it could be. And so that was also one of the reasons why I wanted a space for us, because we move every few years and then you don't have a house. Even the house that we own, other people are living in it right now. We're renting it out. So we really wanted something that wherever we were, we could go to it.
Yeah.
I'm lucky where I'm on the East Coast. I'm in Virginia. So there's a lot of military bases in Virginia, North Carolina. So we always had intended, and we've been out to the Midwest. We used to live in Kansas.
Okay.
But there's a lot of opportunities where we could bounce around to place that may not be 2 hours like where we are right now in DC.
Yeah.
But could be like, less than 6 hours, which still, if you're trying to do a long weekend, it's totally doable. So that was the plan.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. I mean, the great thing about a tiny house on a trailer is that if you really had to move like to the West Coast or something, you could move it. You could probably rent your land to another person with a tiny house, since it's all set up for a tiny house.
I love that idea. Actually, I never thought about that. My husband did say that. He's like, we could always move it if we ever wanted to as well. That was another investment that we had, but I didn't think about that. But yeah, it's pretty good idea.
Yeah. So you mentioned before that like at first your husband was like totally anti and you kind of had to drag him along into it. And now he's like number one tiny house booster. What do you think accounted for that change? Like, why do you think like, what about it?
Well, there was a couple things. So he was anti the land. I mean, he's one of those people that he complains, but then lets me do it. I'm spoiled. We've been together for 20 years and I admit it, I'm spoiled.
Okay.
But begrudgingly, he's like, yeah. So he was like that about the land until he saw another business and saw what they did.
Okay.
Undeveloped, and how he was like, oh, that looks like the land Maegan just bought, but on a larger scale. And you were able to turn that to it. So he's him seeing the after thing. And then when we went over to our tiny house builder to check out their stuff, he was really impressed of how nice it was. And he's 6'1", but my stepson, who's an adult, met up with us. And my stepson, who's 6'4", was so comfortable walking around these, the houses they were building or about to ship out. And so that's what changed for my husband. Just, I guess,
that's awesome.
Experiencing it. Like, you're not gonna understand it until you're in it. I had family members I'm from Jersey. Like, I'm a Jersey girl. I have family members who did not get this. They did not understand it. One of which is my father.
Yep.
And he came for a visit, and we actually ended up doing, it was a couple towns. So we were in a hotel a couple towns over, but we were like, hey, let's do a drive so you can see the tiny house because it's finished. And he got it once he was inside, and he's like, wow. And we've had other people who have gone in there and are just blown away of how much space and functionality and how comfortable it can be. And so my father was very like, this makes no sense. And now like he was even toying with the idea of having a tiny house. But, then it came to like looking for land. So he's like, all right, I'm just going to stick to my condo in a beachside town that he's in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's just experiencing it. No, you're never going to be able to convince anybody of it, especially if you're someone who's just so passionate about it. Other people are just not going to get it. They have to experience it themselves. And once they experience it, then they have their own amazing interaction with it. And I think that's the case with my husband. He actually sneaks off there from time to time. He's like, I got to check on the tiny, for us, it's been, we did some weekend trips with the RV, just testing that out, but we're going to go back. So it's been a month since we've been at the tiny house. So we're going to go back soon, but he likes to check on it here and there. And sometimes I think he makes excuses just so he can hang out there without us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure it's a great place to be by yourself too.
Absolutely.
Do you know other people in the military with movable tiny homes?
No, RVs have been a big, big thing. So I knew from early on in my career, I always saw people full-time RVing, which is really smart because the military gives you like a house aside it from your salary.
Okay.
They give you a house. Yeah. They give you that housing allowance, which depending on your area, like if you're in Hawaii, for instance, you get a very lucrative and place. Yeah, no, it's a lot because it has to do to how the area is at. So, if it's someplace that's like the cost of living. So they give you this cost of living.
The cost of living.
For those listeners that are military out there, and I think I've seen this on Bryce's show as well, and I don't think a lot of military take advantage of it. So if you just happen to be listening and you're in Hawaii and you're I realized Hawaii, they are tiny house friendly. You can't do an Airbnb with it, but they're tiny house friendly.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of, and if finding that lot and that land, and then you can bank a lot of that. So a lot of military people I was familiar with did full-time RVing just to do that. It's like the cost of living, and then you're saving up money. There have been a couple military people that my builder actually, it was a couple that was thinking about doing tiny house because they were full RVing and they wanted that.
Yeah.
And so they asked me to, just talk to them and share about my experience. I think what comes down to it with a lot of people, it's financing it. And that's a struggle. But I would fully support more military people being aware of this option because a lot of RV, especially if it's certified as an RV, if you have that type of certification, you're not going to have, and you'll always have a house wherever you go. One of the hardest thing as a military family is house hunting. And sometimes you can find yourself in a hotel for one time for us, it was like 2.5 weeks because it was so hard to find a place to live.
Wow.
Given that market, I've known people who've been in a hotel for a month.
Wow.
So knowing that you have a house that you always have and you can move it, I would have do that now, but my
Yeah.
husband's like, I have way too much stuff. I love part-time tiny living, but I can't do that full time. But
Yeah.
that's something I've really, really entertained because of that.
Nice. Well, I've really enjoyed talking with you. One thing that I like to ask all my guests is, are there one or two or three resources like, YouTube channels or books or really anything that you'd recommend to our listeners?
How I found out about your podcast, Ethan, it was through Melanie Copeland. So I'm part of her.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm part of her Facebook support group. It's Virginia Tiny House Supporters. And so she's always been a wealth of knowledge. She has a book.
Yep.
So that's super, super helpful. Your podcast has been incredible. And then your typical YouTube. I love, my favorites are Living Big in a Tiny House and Tiny House Giant Journey.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my two like favorite ones.
Yep. Nice. Well, that's awesome. Those are all great resources. And again, I really, appreciate the compliments, and I'm so glad that this show has helped you in some small way.
Thanks for having me and sharing my story. It's been awesome.
Awesome. Well, great to talk with you, Maegan. Thank you so much to Maegan Bell for being a guest on the show today. You can find the show notes, including a complete transcript and photos of Maegan's beautiful tiny house, over at thetinyhouse.net/295. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/295. If you're new to the show, I would really appreciate it if you would follow the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Following the show makes sure you get every new episode every single week. There are lots of good ones to come. Also, don't forget, if you are a listener who has embarked on the tiny house journey yourself and you'd like to share your story on the show, reach out to me, podcast@thetinyhouse.net, and I'd love to feature your story on a future episode of the show. Well, that's all for this week. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast.